right. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for our new practitioner webinar series that we give every month. Today we're joined by Doctors Parul Barry, Adrianna Masters, Yoon Rose Lee, and Gillianne Defoe. And today they're going to be speaking on women in radiation oncology, our history and paths forward. Welcome. We want to thank all the guests for coming and being able to share their time with us today. If you wouldn't mind sort of introducing yourselves as you do your portion of the lectures, and then we'll all have an opportunity to ask questions at the end. And if you'd like to also use the chat function as well to place your questions, we'll get to those as well. Thank you. Dr. Lee, would you like to start?
Sure, I would love to. Thank you so much for the introduction. I think hopefully everyone can see my slides well. So yeah, we're really excited to be giving this talk today. I think that we have all been really passionate, the four of us, about this topic, and I think ACRO has been extremely supportive. And so what we're really interested in doing today is really outlining for you a comprehensive overview of kind of the history of women in radiation oncology and what how far we have come in terms of progress from the early days in terms of women's role and their recognition for what they have done. And so my part of the talk will be actually just kind of briefly going over some of the people who we sometimes know and some we don't know as well. And so this first slide, sorry, ignore the disclosures, is really just a little timeline of some of the women that I'm going to talk about today. There's obviously more, and certainly I'm not going to be able to cover everybody in the course of just a few minutes today. On this timeline, shown kind of in historical order, are 5 women who I will talk about who have really made kind of outstanding contributions. And what's interesting is when I was first researching this topic, I didn't know the names of some of these women at all, much less the contributions they made. So it was really fascinating. I've kind of bulleted a few of the things that these people are most notable for having contributed. I think everybody here knows Marie Curie, but outside of Marie Curie, most of us here probably on this talk have never heard of Margaret Cleaves, Lise Meitner, Edith Quimby, or Chen Shengwu. And I think that it's really important that we take the time to recognize them for what they've contributed to. So just briefly, I'm going to go through each of these women. Margaret Cleaves, she was born in 1848 in the US, in Iowa. She was very ambitious and wanted to pursue medical school from a young age. And at that time, it was very rare for women to go to medical school. She ultimately was able to finish her training in psychiatry at the top of her class. But what's fascinating is her actually ultimate contribution to radiation oncology was actually because of her interest in women's health. And ultimately, I guess at that point in time, even though her training was in psychiatry, she practiced actually in the care of women broadly and was the head of the women's department in Harrisburg State Hospital, and ultimately was the first physician to ever treat cervical cancer with radiation. And she actually used a combination therapy approach, not only using ionizing radiation, external beam essentially, but also used intravaginal insertion of radium, essentially the first brachytherapy instance use. And she described this, very clear detail in her book. It's very interesting that she came up with this idea. And actually her book that I wrote here in 1904 that she published was really describing how there's no standard in the world, or much less in the US, in how to use brachytherapy or harness the use of radiation for the treatment of cervical cancer or gynecological cancers. She was very little recognized for the contributions she made, and she faced an extreme amount of persecution. Actually, the rights and sort of recognition given to her male classmates were never given to her. And what's interesting is she actually was one of the women that I would talk about today who actually never complained about this. And when asked, she always said that she was given her she was given, the privileges she felt she deserved. It was just really interesting as things evolved. I think women began to stand up more for their rights. Marie Curie is a woman that has deserved and gotten some recognition, I would say. She was born originally in Poland, and she was trained in physics and mathematics. We all know that she discovered radium along with polonium with her husband Pierre in France at the time. It's important to mention is actually she tried to return to Poland and was persecuted because of her gender and could not work in Poland in the sciences and had to return to France to just complete her PhD. And so later on, what's probably the most important thing and most noble thing she did was not just the discovery of these atoms, right? But actually that she ultimately treated an estimated 1 million soldiers, imaged them with X-ray units during the course of World War I as part of the Red Cross Radiology Service. And ultimately she died due to her work on radium and this exposure of leukemia. She is well recognized today throughout the world and also in France. So Lise Meitner was born in Vienna. She was the second woman to ever receive a doctorate degree from the University of Vienna, and she later completed a lot of her work in Sweden. What's really unfortunate in terms of Lise Meitner was she was never recognized for her most important contribution, which is that she actually coined and essentially co-discovered fission, nuclear fission. And she co-discovered this or co-invented this idea with her nephew. And her nephew ultimately won the Nobel Prize in chemistry. And she was essentially never mentioned in the prize. And more importantly, she was essentially nominated 48 times for the Nobel Prize and never once received the award. Edith Quimby was born in 1891, also in the US, in the Midwest and in Illinois. And she was majored in mathematics and physics. And she went on to receive the Janeway Medal from the American Radium Society and really contributed significantly to the development of diagnostic and therapeutic applications of X-rays in the treatment of cancer, but also was considered a founder of nuclear medicine. As you can see, at the point of Edith, she not only had a long life, but she also, basically living almost, more than 100 years. Over the course of her life, she was able to receive recognition and positions that the other women I have mentioned here have not. And I think this is sort of the, progression that I wanted to mention is that, as the women have progressed in this timeline, they've gotten more and more recognition and opportunities in terms of their career. She was given an opportunity to actually work on the nuclear bomb at the time when the US was working on developing it, and she actually refused due to concern for the controversial aspect of harm. Qin Wu is a Chinese a Chinese American physicist, and she was born in Jiangsu, China. Later completed her work in UC Berkeley, and she received her PhD in physics there. And subsequently her career in the US. She worked on the Manhattan Project at Columbia, and is considered the first lady of physics. And what's funny is before this, preparing for this talk and actually researching this topic, I had never heard of her name. So, I feel bad for my own ignorance, but I think it's really important that you guys are here today to hear about these women. And with that, I want to highlight this really great chapter that I read. This is published in the history of the radiological sciences as a chapter, and written by Kate Knepper and Sarah Donaldson. A wonderful chapter describing the history of all of the women I mentioned today, but many, many more. And I think will be an outstanding read for anyone who's interested in this topic. And with that, I'm going to let Adrianna go on.
So I have a few more women that were very integral in terms of radiation oncology. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, it's not letting me share for whatever reason. Sorry. It is blocked me. Rose, can I use the slides that we've already merged? Because our firewall will not allow me to share screens at work.
Dr. Masters, can you see this?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So I have no relevant disclosures. Next slide. I work at Springfield Clinic. So just to give you some an overview, and then Dr. Barry will more further go into detail on this. Current status is that women are about a third of residents and about a third of faculty, but as we go throughout career development, that gap widens. We represent a quarter of PD positions, but only 1% of those are underrepresented minority females. Department chairs, we're at 0% for underrepresented minority females and at 11.7% of women in general. And then looking even at editors-in-chief of major oncology journals, we're very underrepresented. So that's part of why looking at the foundations of women in radiation oncology is very important, and looking at the people that paved the way for some of us to be here and do the things that we love to do. So next slide. ACRO has been a wonderful resource for me. They've definitely invested in women in leadership. Our current chairman, Sheila Rege, our president, Joanne Dragan, and the 2020 gold medalist, Susha Aspel, were all very pivotal persons in ACRO leadership and has been recognized in these positions and continue to grow the pipeline of women in radiation oncology. Parul Barry, who's here with us today, Jessica Schuster, and Mona Arbab also serve on the board for ACRO. I'd also like to do a shameless plug for the yearly Women's Forum at ACRO. It is always very well attended. I hope to do so again this year. I hope to see everyone there, but it's a great forum for networking, for talking about leadership, for some of the challenges that everyone faces in radiation oncology, and to find a place where everyone can freely talk, to network, and to find resources. There's also going to be a diversity and inclusion forum at the annual meeting, so I hope to see everyone there. So next slide. So one of the other folks that we wanted to look at today was Sarah Donaldson. She attended Dartmouth Medical School. She was one of 6 women in her class. It was only the second year that they'd allowed women to be part of the medical school class. She was one of the foundational leaders in pediatric lymphomas, attending Stanford. She is both an American Radium Society Janeway medalist, but also an ACR gold medalist. And she was the first female president of both ABR and ASTRO. So she was a huge role model in terms of leadership. And so some of her pathway to get to that position, though, was a very circuitous route. She, in one of her interviews, talked about initially going to nursing school, working in a lab, like finding out how radioactive materials worked, and having some mentorship lead her along the path of knowing that she was very bright and will probably do an excellent job in terms of many different avenues for her. But when she was asked, why not radiotherapy? And she said, oh, this is about degradation, isotopes. I don't know about areas under the curve. How am I going to do this? And one of the great answers too, I thought that was wonderful advice we should all listen to, is hire a great physicist, find a good team, surround yourself with good people. All right, next. Dr. Dinshaw was one of the founders of Radiation Oncology in India. She really brought the Tata Memorial Hospital into the forefront of radiation oncology, bringing it into the 21st century. She started their inpatient service, multidisciplinary clinics, started a residency program, started the bone marrow transplant service in India, and also introduced radium afterloaders for brachytherapy. And also impacted the World Health Organization as serving as a board member in terms of access to resources. So next. Eleanor Montague was also a very inspiring person for anybody that loves treating breast cancers, and is thrilled with the fact that we no longer have to do a Hallstatt mastectomy. We can do much less invasive surgeries. And she was part of the process, along with some of the other folks at MD Anderson, Fisher and Fletcher, at allowing people to have a smaller surgery, convincing some of the surgical folks that maybe you didn't necessarily have to take so much of the chest wall, that maybe you should be involved in terms of upfront discussion for planning for radiation therapy or planning as to what variety of treatments are going to be the best option for each woman. So they started the pre-surgery clinic model that many of us are familiar with today, where everyone meets the patient in advance and talks about what the potential options are for curative management. She's one of the co-authors of the NSABP B04, and she was actually doing neoadjuvant chemotherapy, preoperative radiation therapy in the 1960s and 70s. So well ahead of her time. And she basically won every radiation oncology or radiology award that I know of. So the Radium Society, RSNA, the Fletcher Society, AWR, as well as an Alumni Achievement Award from Penn. Next. Now for some more contemporary folks. Lori Pierce is the professor and vice provost of University of Michigan. She's the current chair of the board of ASCO and was the president from 2020 to 2021, and brought forward a lot of themes related to diversity and inclusion and the diverse patient population that we serve. Next. Iris Gibbs is another contemporary who is a professor of radiation oncology and associate dean of admission at the Stanford School of Medicine. She's the chairperson of the board of directors of the Radiosurgery Society, the secretary of ACRO, and is a fellow in multiple different medical societies. Karen Wakefield is another example of a woman in radiation oncology who is paving a way that is not an easy route. She's a professor at Vanderbilt, but also is the professor of cancer research and the executive director of the alliance between Meharry School of Medicine and Vanderbilt. And most recently, she was appointed by President Joe Biden to the National Cancer Advisory Board. And I just found out yesterday is now in the ASCO radiation oncology spot. Yeah, good. There's some references for your perusal, and then next to Parul.
All right, that was really excellent. Wow, Dr. Gillianne Masters, you really did a wonderful job. So you've really taken us quite a bit through the history of radiation oncology, you know, what we have, where we have been, and highlighted some very important people who have really shaped the field, built the field, created the field. So now I kind of wanted to change gears and look at where we are now, which we've slightly touched on, but just to see overall where we are in medicine and where we're going. And then to kind of dovetail all of this and finish all of this will be Dr. Defoe, who will kind of say, where should we go next? So these are my disclosures here. All right. So when we look at this, actually, the American Association of Medical Colleges has followed, gender and racial disparities quite a bit, since we have a long history in this country of, segregation, right? So, Dr. Masters and I are from Louisville. We know that in Louisville, Kentucky, where Abraham Flexner was, and who actually designed all of medical education for the country, modern medical education, there were 5 medical schools, of which 1 was a medical school for people of color, 4 were for, Caucasian people. We also have a Jewish hospital, because Jewish people were not allowed to go to the Christian hospitals. So we know that in this country, we have a long history of racial, gender, and religious-based segregation that's really rooted within medicine. So for this reason, the American Association of Medical Colleges has really tried to follow along and see how we can improve things. So at this point, about half of all medical students are women, and that is actually a really big accomplishment. I know when my mom was in medical school, she was one of just 7 out of 300 people in India. In the US, it's obviously very similar. It tracked very similarly. And we had a long way to go. But despite the fact that we now have achieved general parity within medical schools, we are not represented in the workforce. So despite the fact that about 50% of, women in medical school, people in medical school are women, only about 30% of the academic medicine workforce is women. Additionally, we know that women are actually not promoted as quickly to the same levels of leadership as men, even if they have the same background, the same CVs. We also know that women are typically offered a lower salary with less resources compared to their male counterparts when you account for equal effort, rank, training, and experience. So despite all of this, we already have one leg behind. Additionally, once you even get into the door of the academic workforce, we start to notice that there is a gender gap in authorship for peer-reviewed publications. So that's the higher level of publications that we want as we progress through our careers, and they're important for promotion. Additionally, male researchers are more likely than female researchers to get funding. And we see women get promoted less. So what does that mean? They're less likely to get recognition for the work that they do, well, despite having, one leg behind. They get less honors, less speaking invitations, and less awards. So these are all important things to know, that despite, being behind, even when they get through the door, they still face a lot of barriers. So the AAMC looked at this. They developed this toolkit, which we all kind of worked on together. And one of the slides that they have here, which is quite nice, shows that, even at the starting gate, when women come in, we're at almost 50% at the instructor level, 50% women, 50% men. You still see quite a bit of disparities racially, right? And then as you progress to the full professor level, which is really only about 25% women, you see a significant reduction in Asian women, in underrepresented and excluded minorities. And that's important because that brings up the intersectionality that is the disparities in healthcare and in academic medicine. So what about radiation oncology? We can talk about medicine, but we're all radiation oncologists here. We care about radiation oncology. And right now we're on the lower end. We have only about a quarter or less than a third of women applying to radiation oncology and then matriculating in as residents, okay? So this pretty much stays steady. So you see residents graduating, they become female faculty. So the number of faculty and the number of residents generally mirror each other. But once again, like the AAMC published, when we actually get to leadership and recognition, you see the numbers really drop and the pipeline becomes leaky. So only about 20% of radiation oncology program directors are women, and only about 12% are chairs. And this leaky pipeline is in radiation oncology and within all of medicine. But it's important because it goes back to the slide that despite equal effort, equal, CVs, equal accomplishments, we just do not make it to that level. We do not get promoted to that level. We do not get recognized to that level. Furthermore, Dr. DeVille actually published this right around the time when George Floyd got murdered by the police. And he really laid this out. It's a really great article called "I Can't Breathe: The Continued Disproportionate Exclusion of Black Physicians in the United States Radiation Oncology Workforce." And it's a very thorough paper. I actually ask you to take time after this and take a look at it, because we have very few, very well below average Black physicians in radiation oncology. And he details this very nicely. So you see the number of ERIS applicants, you see the number of trainees and residents, the trainees applying, residents getting through and then becoming faculty. And you very much see not only are they, minorities, so African Americans are generally about 15% of the population, they're already coming in at a lower number. And then for full-time faculty in radiation oncology, they're only 1.5%. So that is concerning. And that is not just women, that's men and women. Okay. So, and he did this really nice plot where he kind of plotted it all out and looked at, women, those of Hispanic race and ethnicity, whites, Asians, and Blacks. And here you see really just how extreme the disparities are for those excluded minorities. Additionally, I wanted to touch on what Dr. Masters brought up, was not only do we see the institutional issues, which I just presented, but also on the journal boards. So the editors in chief, the leaders, right? So a lot of people in academic medicine would like to become an editor in chief. That's kind of the premier space for a journal. And this is not shared. There's several disparities. This is not shared with people of color or with women. And we see serious disparities here. And it looks like I made a little error on my little red line. But when we look at editors in chief that are women of journals, now there are no Black, Middle Eastern and North African or Hispanic women. Now we do, since this publication, Dr. Suyam was appointed to be the editor-in-chief of the Red Journal. So that was a change. But certainly that is what we need to consider, is this intersectionality. That, yes, there are some strides being made by some groups, but not by others. Overall, women are underrepresented, right? As editors-in-chiefs of these journals, they're only 20%, but nearly all of them are white women, right? We're certainly not seeing women who are of excluded races, of Black or Hispanic race, and that's important to keep in mind. And same thing with the national societies. Dr. Masters did an excellent presentation on that, showing that yes, we are making it on the boards of national societies, and I love serving on ACRO. I think it's one of the most foremost premier societies that really cares a lot about women and diversity and inclusion. We were one of the first societies to create the Diversity and Inclusion Committee and to create the Women's Board. That's why Dr. Asbill created it, because there was no place for women to go. But certainly, we want to continue to promote women. We want more women in boards and leadership. And I don't know any other society that has a woman who is both the president and the chairperson of the society other than ACRO. And these are just some of the many barriers that women and women of color experience that do cause us to leave medicine, especially academic medicine. The put downs, the condescending comments, the mistreatment, the sexist jokes, all of the barriers, the attacks, what you mentioned, Rose, how that one, I think Dr. Quimby was persecuted for who she was. There's no reason for that. And you see that nearly a third of women experiences, or actually a third of women experiences, whereas only 1 in 8 men do, right? So that's concerning. No one should experience this, neither men or women, but certainly it's a larger proportion of women experiencing this. So, and I did want to build on what Dr. Master said, just another friendly reminder, please join us so we can build on this conversation topic at ACRO. These are important discussions, not only at the Susha Asbell Women's Forum, but also at the Diversity and Inclusion and Reception, led by Dr. Masters and Dr. Mayaker and Dr. Gentile. Okay. All right. So Dr. Defoe will be presenting next. on paths forward.
Thank you. So happy to be here. Hopefully you can hear me. I have one disclosure. I'm the founder of the Time MD. Moving down to my next slide. Next slide. Thank you. Looking at the future of the workforce in radiation oncology. So, for many years, radiation oncology has been a highly sought after specialty, right? There were more people interested in radiation oncology in this specialty than there were actually radiation oncology residency positions available. But what we have seen over the past 10 years is that there have been an increase in new programs, as well as an expansion of current programs, for fear that the demand for radiation oncologists would be higher than the current supply. But what we found was, unfortunately, that many programs in 2019 were unmatched. The unmatched rate for programs increased 14.5% compared to previous years where it was only 2.5%. Next slide. The cause for this is multifactorial in the match rate, mainly stemming from questions regarding the long-term viability of the field. So we've decreased the use of radiation for certain diseases. We've increased the use of hypofractionation, and there was a fear of the decrease in reimbursement from the radiation oncology alternative payment model, which has now been delayed. Adding all of that to increased negative social media influence have all decreased in the medical student interest in the field. And you can see from the graph here that the number of students who are US students who are applying to radiation oncology has significantly dropped compared to the number of positions that are available. This graph does not tell us, though, is that there's been a 40% increase in DO applicants over the past 5 years, and a good number of applicants in the radiation oncology pool are actually international applicants. You could skip the next slide. Skip that one. Thank you. So go back up one. Thank you. So 2019 matriculating class of medical students was composed of more women than men, 50.5% compared to 25% in 1981. So this cross-sectional study used workforce data from the AAMC on 16 largest medical specialties with varying proportions of female presence to create a model to predict gender diversity among specialties, evaluating characteristics such as years of specialty training, weekly work hours, step 1 scores, research activities, etc., at different time points. What we see in this trial is the primary care constituted the highest absolute number of women over time. Female representation among radiation oncologists was 23.4% in 2006. And jumped up some to 27.5% in 2020. But let's take a closer look. The absolute change in female radiation oncology increased by 1.5% between 2006 and 2011, 2.2% between 2011 and 2016, but only to 0.4% between 2016 and 2020. And 0.4% increase between 2016 and 2020 was the lowest in comparison to the other 15 specialties. Next slide. So if we look at factors predictive of higher gender diversity rank, we found that in this trial, they found that the lower average step 1 scores predicted higher gender diversity, fewer years of training, fewer work hours, availability of a standard 3rd-year clerkship for a given specialty, and a high baseline number of female physicians within that specialty. A low number of research activities and a greater interest among matriculated medical students were associated with higher gender diversity rank, but this was not statistically significant. So the authors concluded that high step 1 scores and research activities were not really barriers to recruiting and matching women in radiation oncology, as evidenced by the high proportion of women in dermatology. But keep in mind, specialties with a higher emphasis on step 1 scores seem to be less gender diverse, And just to keep in mind as well, perhaps this will no longer be an issue when the step 1 scores will become phased out in 2022. But this trial really highlights the need to expose women to radiation oncology field during their pre-medical and pre-clerkship phases of their career. So we have recognized the problem, right? Women in radiation oncology have made a significant contribution to the field, but overall, women radiation oncologists are few in number and often not within leadership roles. Even fewer women of color, especially those who are historically excluded, have leadership roles. So next slide. Next slide. Well, so then what will it take to equal the playing field in radiation oncology? And one of this is that we need more female leaders in radiation oncology. So the question is then, what can you do now as individuals, as women? And here's my blueprint for leadership career advancement. It takes, first of all, knowing what you want, whether or not you want an academic versus a non-academic career. Then you need to determine your goals and ensure that they align with your values. This allows you to strategically plan, learning who to talk to and how to make connections, what to talk about, expanding your network within and outside your institution to leverage your relationships, developing necessary skills, taking advantage of leadership programs offered at your institution, participation in committees and councils in professional organizations, and promoting yourself within and outside your organization. But you need to know how to negotiate. And women tend not to ask. Therefore, first you must identify and own your own accomplishments and communicate those and communicate your value as a leader, sharing your career goals with your mentor and strategically linking your value to leadership and organizational goals. Next slide. I want to make a business case for women in leadership. Promoting women increases financial performance. We have a number of studies that have shown this. Fortune 500 companies with the highest representation of women, next slide. I'm sorry, go back to the slide. Thank you. Fortune 500 companies with the highest representation of women on boards financially outperform those with the fewest female board members. Gallup study has found that gender diverse business units have higher than average revenue than less diverse business units. And having larger percentages of women in organizations also predicts greater job satisfaction, higher levels of employee engagement, and decreased burnout for everyone. That's everyone, all workers, regardless of gender, age, ethnicity, or leadership level. Next slide. But we can't do this alone. We need sponsorship, we need mentorship. A study conducted, next slide, a study conducted by David Smith and Brad Johnson at the US Naval Academy and War College found that when women are mentored by men, women make more money. They get better promotions and have better career outcomes. But we've also found that women are usually over-mentored and under-sponsored. So what does that mean? Mentors are a trusted counselor or guide who provides stability, grounding, and opportunities for professional growth. A sponsor, on the other hand, is a powerful person who provides public support for advancement and promotion. So in other words, a mentor is someone who has knowledge and shares it with you. A sponsor is someone who has power and will use it for you. Next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. When we map the ABCDs of sponsorship, sponsors amplify our voices, making you being aware of and talking up a protege's accomplishments. The intended goal for that is to create or increase a perceiver's positive impression of the protege. A sponsor will boost you, formally nominating a protege for a specific opportunity, writing letters of recommendation, attesting to the protege's future potential. This intended goal increases others' expectation of the protege's potential and readiness for advancement. A sponsor will connect you, introduce you to high status individuals, and invite a protege to exclusive events or meetings with the intended goal of creating or enhancing the perceiver's positive impressions of the protege, increasing the protege's visibility. You're sharing a screen. I can't, we can't see the, yeah, thank you. And then a sponsor will defend you, right? They'll challenge others' negative perceptions of a protege, providing an alternative explanation for poor performance, protecting a protege from harmful exposure, with the intended goal of reversing or neutralizing others' uncertainty or negative perceptions of the protege. Next slide. I want to make a case for not just having mentors or mentorship programs, but a mentorship culture, which is defined as a dynamic culture of mentorship is essential to the success of academic medical centers and should be elevated to the level of a major strategic priority. Includes advising, teaching, coaching, advocacy, and sponsorship, and role modeling, as well as assistance with personal development and achieving a work-life balance. Creating a mentorship culture, not just a program, would require us to reward mentoring behavior, support and publicize mentoring, make promotions, tenure, pay steps contingent on mentoring behaviors, provide money to support mentoring, count mentoring by faculty as key service, and fund awards for mentoring. Next slide. So, you know, we had a great opportunity here to talk about uplifting and providing sponsorship for all women. But keep in mind that Black Americans make up 13% of the US population, but only comprise about 5.4% of the physician workforce. And of these, about 3% are Black women. The statistics are even more sobering in radiation oncology, where only Black faculty make up about 1.5% of the population. I leave you here with a very poignant essay by Dr. Fatima Cody Stanford that was published in The Lancet. And it states, and I quote, "A paucity of Black women in academic leadership and medicine not only limits the role models students can take inspiration from, but may also contribute to inadequate care for Black patients, particularly given the importance of racial and gender concordance in healthcare. Healthcare organizations need institutionally driven diversity programs to improve advancement, retention, professional opportunities, and the campus climate for all community members. Such efforts must be embedded at all levels of academia, from an institution's mission to its innovation and business interests. We must endorse and expand such initiatives that recognize DIE work as a shared responsibility and offer Black women physicians the space to move the needle forward without overburdening them in the process. Institutions must spearhead these efforts to open opportunities and reduce adversity for Black women and to construct inclusive and equitable environments in which all of their faculty can thrive. Structural problems require structural solutions." Next slide. So here are the radiation oncology ladies at UPMC. I have been encouraged and inspired to be here to talk to you today by them. I leave you here today hopeful, because it is from hope that I take inspired action to continue this effort in not just recruitment of women, but all women, especially those from historically excluded populations, into the field of radiation oncology. And in doing so, I get to pave the way and hopefully make it easier for those who come after me. And in doing so, I hope I get to honor those who came before me. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Dr. Kim, if you want to move on to asking the questions, we can.
Yes, of course. Well, thank you to the panelists for speaking on such an important topic of women in radiation oncology. It's really great to have an opportunity to hear about all the great women radiation oncologists who have come before all of us, and all the great women radiation oncologists who are in our field, improving diversity and inclusion and equity in our field, as well as all of medicine. It was also great to hear about, some of the ways that, we can improve, the promotion of women in leadership roles. I just wanted to open up the forum for any questions that the audience might have. And you can also have any questions placed in the chat box as well. You can raise your hand or you can unmute yourself, I believe. Is there anyone who'd like to ask any questions to our panelists today? Oh, so we've got a question here from Marsha Haley. Are there any efforts to recruit females from medical school into radiation oncology? And if there's anyone on the panel who'd like to speak on that topic, maybe Dr. Barry, since you spoke about the AAMC.
Sure. So I'll go ahead and start. Certainly some medical schools do make efforts to recruit generally into radiation oncology. I think overall the big concern is people don't even know about radiation oncology. Actually, Dr. Defoe may know a little bit more. There's a new effort at Pitt with a focus on diversity and inclusion and improving diversity and inclusion here. And we are seeking to improve, enrollment, or not enrollment, but improve getting people into fields that they've historically been excluded from, including radiation oncology. Specifically in terms of women, I'm not aware of that, but I do know we did have that one brunch to kind of recruit some medical students that were from historically excluded backgrounds, but it's going to be spotty. I don't know, Dr. Defoe or Dr. Masters or Dr. Lee, if you wanted to speak on that.
So I could speak a little bit about it. So here at Pitt, we have, we have radiation oncology interest groups. We have interest meetings. We also, I've had people just reach out to me personally, women reach out to me personally to shadow me. But, we've moved a lot to social media now. And so I think a lot of the recruitment effort, especially in a time of pandemic, may have to transition to social media. I think there's still an opportunity here that we can grow interest. In terms of DEI, we have a new dean at the medical school, and DEI is at the top of his agenda. And one of the things that they have started doing are inviting all the residency programs and all the applicants, and having a special DEI event for the historically excluded populations, and that has been a great hit. I think the feedback we have gotten from that has been amazing.
Dr. Defoe, I have noticed a lot of medical schools now, including a special, dean or leadership position in, specific to DEI. Are there any DEI leadership positions in our radiation oncology societies? And, should that be something that's, continues to be, thought about?
So yes, so the medical school here definitely has a designated DEI specialist. Her name is Dr. Ricky Tripp. And in terms of on the society level, maybe Dr. Barry can speak more towards that, but I believe there is a board now. So
Yeah, so at least at Pitt, right now, every specialty like gyne, family medicine, they all have a vice chair now, diversity and inclusion. So that was part of the dean's effort here. But certainly it's not like that everywhere. That was one of the major recruitment needs that was brought in with the dean. And I do actually think it's provided a lot of value. And then, they all kind of work as a group together, all of these D&I chairs at Pitt, and kind of work as a group in academic medicine to improve D&I overall. And they have a lead for that too. So yeah, it's really, it's certainly strengthening here. It's new, but it's strengthening under Dr. Shaker quite a bit. And I think hopefully we'll see it a little bit more widespread across the country.
And they're a small number, but there are some programs that are specifically looking for historically underrepresented persons to do research fellowships, like at the summer as med students. There are a couple of those you can do through ACRO, as well as certain institutions will sponsor the like housing for for a med student to do an away rotation, because that's been something also that's excluded some persons that are not from financially secure backgrounds or from underrepresented groups, to allow them to be able to participate in some of the things that will make them a successful applicant for residency.
That's wonderful. I do see a hand up here. Adrianna, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, hi, my name's Aradna. I wanted to thank the speakers. The talk was just outstanding, really very data driven. I had actually a couple of questions. So I'm an associate professor, but I'm on the younger side. I think one of the things that I found is, and maybe the speakers know, in terms of having funding, say for someone who's mostly clinical, but does do some clinical research and clinical educating, is there any resources inside of ASTRO or ACRO that are, kind of tilted toward this? I'm not a MD PhD with R01s or anything like that, but even competing for smaller funding, I think has been very challenging. So I would appreciate, I guess, if any of the speakers can comment on resources for that I may not be aware of. I've applied for some. So some of them I'm waiting for, but I've gotten declined from quite a few opportunities. And then my other question too is that if the speakers can comment on, I've seen a number of articles in the popular press as of late that I think is particularly pertinent to our fields and has been discussed in a lot of our forums, is the negative social implications of women. And I think particularly they say younger women kind of, asking for opportunities, versus men. Is there a way that you all feel, is an appropriate and respectful way to kind of, overcome that? And also, I think the other thing is I wanted to get the speaker's thought on the, the childcare issue for those of us in our 30s and 40s. As everyone knows, it's kind of like a, workforce crisis that definitely impacts, clinicians and scientists in our age group. I realize it's a lot, but I've been so impressed by the talk. I just wanted to ask those questions.
Why don't we do this? It's two questions. So Dr. Lee can speak to the grants, and maybe Dr. Masters and Dr. Defoe could even speak to the childcare issues, if that's fair. That way we all get to speak on that.
Sorry, I think I missed the middle question, or I forgot. There was 3 questions, one related to the grants, one related to childcare, and there was one in the middle, was there?
Yeah, it was just talking about negative social implications in workplaces, about women asking for things or trying to be assertive versus men doing it, that kind of negative social backlash inside the workplace, which obviously is not the intended outcome. But it goes back to whoever's first slide about women tend to ask for things less. And I think that may be one of the reasons.
Yeah, actually, Dr. Barry and I had this discussion one-on-one, probably multiple times. I'm happy to talk more about the grants, and maybe I'll defer that second question to Dr. Barry. So in terms of grant opportunities, I think it can be really challenging to know what you qualify for and be prepared, if you will, to qualify for them. I'm certainly not like an international road expert on this. I have applied for and received or not received some of the applications I have applied for since I was in high school, actually, for these kinds of grant applications, and subsequently have continued. I would say that one of the most important things in terms of being successful for grants is actually being set up right, meaning identifying the appropriate mechanism, knowing whether you are competitive for that mechanism, and then having the right advisors to like tell you the hard truth about what your application is, right? So basically, if you wrote something that's really not going to be competitive, you need to have a mentor or advisor who's actually willing to tell you that your application sucks, right? And that you need to improve these aspects and tell you the hard truth about it. And then also just know that a lot of times it's luck. I think in terms of identifying specific opportunities, maybe if you can send me a message offline, we can talk more about specific ones. I actually personally try to keep some, try to keep all of them like somewhere like in a list. Maybe don't have all of them listed, but certainly there are ones that are actually dedicated to women. I think at one time I actually was offered a fellowship by like a women's specific society in the sciences. So I think that there are opportunities that are more aimed at women, and also opportunities that are for like underrepresented minorities and also women. And so these opportunities may give you a better chance of getting them. Also, starting small and showing a track record can be really helpful. But like I mentioned, I think it's really helpful, like identifying the right mechanism to apply for is especially important when you consider big organizations like the NIH. Sometimes having a like advisor or a collaborator who can help you look at these grants and have a little bit more experience can give you that leg up. So maybe shoot me a message. I don't want to take up too much time talking about the specifics, but maybe you and I can discuss offline. Happy to do that and give you any tips I know of.
Yeah, thank you. Not to take up everyone's time, but how do we contact any of the speakers? Will any of the contact information be shared? Send out an
Yeah,
email?
we can put our emails in the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I would say in terms of like career development and asking for things, like there's always going to be some subtlety in terms of the situation and the different groups of people that you're talking to. So the same strategy is not going to work for every situation. Sometimes being patient as to when you ask for what is important, I've found, and the context. Demonstrating value, but also not being afraid to remind people that you did those things, and reminding them that you were the pivotal person that started something or that made something successful. I don't think that we should feel bad about ever doing it, because why not? I don't think that other folks being able to do some self-promotion, which I'm not historically good at, is always something that comes easily for everyone. But I think it's something that I'm learning over time. But generally with good results in the right setting, in the right context. Dr. Defoe, what do you think?
Yeah, so this is tough,
Sorry.
right? Because
Yeah.
I think negotiation is a skill, and it's a skill that you have to practice. But along with that, that's where your sponsor would come in, right? So identifying a sponsor, identifying mentors are crucial to getting what you want. And then you can also learn from them, learn how they to negotiate their way. So sponsorship, critical.
That is really
Absolutely.
wonderful. Thank you all. I think we're right at 1 o'clock, so we'll have to end. But you have our contact information. And certainly this discussion can go on. Please, we can discuss this at the ACRO annual meeting, at the sessions that Dr. Masters and I have posted, or certainly feel free to email us. Okay.
Yeah.
We'd
Thank
be
you all
happy
for
to help.
joining us. Yeah, we
Yeah.
appreciate everyone's time and attendance. And remember to come to ACRO if you can from March 9th to 12th.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hope to see everybody there.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for your attendance.